So after this presentation, please visit our YouTube channel, hit subscribe and smash that like button, click the bell to get all our new content. That really helps us out. And stay until the end for more information on donating to AAM. Welcome to another educational, inspiring AAM program, this entitled The Walrus and the Whirlwind in Search of the Turning Point in the Animal Rights Movement. We're sure about our vision to liberate animals, yet unsure how or when we'll get there. Meanwhile, we continue to work in our own silos, but rarely organize as a unified front. In this presentation, Robert Grillo presents his ideas for what underutilized strategic and organizational factors are needed to achieve results based on the experience and study of other social movements. Understanding and applying what has served others well is essential to this movement. My name is Michelle Granberg. I'm your moderator. I'm a mentor and team member with Animal Activism Mentorship. I'm located in New Jersey, and I've been a vegan and activist for almost 7 years. Our mission at AAM is to empower activists to boldly act and equip them with what they need to fight for animal liberation. AAM is a free multinational program supporting new and fledgling animal rights activists to reach their full potential. Founded in 2020, AAM offers a free 3-month mentorship program which pairs experienced activists with aspiring activists. Through one-on-one mentoring, we generate an increased number of effective activists worldwide because we know this movement needs more activists. Additionally, we offer free workshops that train and educate our mentors, mentees, and the public. We have a podcast called the Animal Liberation Hour, and we host large-scale in-person activism events around the country. If you're interested in applying to become a mentor or mentee, or want to get involved or to donate, visit our website, animalactivismmentorship.com. So that being said, it's my pleasure to introduce my friend and fellow mentor. Robert Grillo is an AAM mentor, activist, author, and speaker for all species. He is also the founder and director of Free From Harm, a nonprofit dedicated to helping end animal exploitation. He founded Slaughter Free Chicago in 2018, which has now grown into a network called Slaughter Free Cities. His published works include Contributions to the Humane Hoax, Caged, Top Activists Share Their Wisdom on Effective Animal Advocacy, and Circles of Compassion Connecting Issues of Justice. In addition, Robert writes articles for Free From Harm and curates work from other leading authors. Okay, I'm turning it over to Robert. Go ahead.
Hi, Michelle. It's great to be back on your show again. And appreciate being back after about a year, I guess it's been, huh? A lot has changed for me in that time. And this presentation is kind of a culmination of a soul searching and study and research, and over the winter mainly, starting in the fall and then over the winter. And then I came up with my first draft of this like in the late spring, and it's still a work in progress. So it's never going to be done because things change, you learn new things, you need to apply them, and that's how we innovate as a movement. And I'll just say up front that I don't have the definitive answers for when or how a turning point in the animal freedom movement will occur. But I do feel like I'm getting closer to understanding how that could happen based on what I've learned from ours and other social movements. And so for a long time before I did this, I felt kind of restless. I felt that something was kind of really missing in our movement, but I couldn't really put my finger on it. And I guess the best way to say it is that I felt like we were operating in a kind of vacuum. So like, you know, we're sure what we all kind of agree with, that we want to see animals free. but we're not sure exactly how we're going to get there and when. And so I look at, the landscape of our movement, and I see a multitude. What's striking to me is that there's a multitude of professional advocacy organizations that offer professional advocacy skills, like Mercy for Animals, Humane League, Factory Farming Awareness Coalition, Animal Equality, HSUS, all the big ones. And yet there's no significant training for how to use the power of grassroots campaigning. Of course there is some, but AAM is a prime example, I think, of providing training and mentorship for grassroots campaigning, which is the lifeblood of any successful social movement that we look at. Another striking feature that I see about us is that we all work in our own silos, but rarely organize as a unified front and learn how to build coalitions like other movements do. So if we look at the last 40 years of the animal freedom or animal rights movement, what we've seen is that the animal exploitation industry that exploits the 99%, the farmed animals, right, has grown a lot. And the concentration of, not only has it grown a lot, but the concentration of power within the industry has solidified in an unprecedented way, with virtually no resistance from our movement. There's very few organizations and groups that are launching a bona fide resistance movement to this industry and to this concentration of power, which is a lot more than just the animal industries, but also their cronies in government and federal and state government, right? So this presentation, The Walrus and the Whirlwind, is where I decided I could share what I've been learning, and particularly the strategic and organizational factors that seem to be needed, and then applying what has served, trying to apply what has served others well, if that's possible. So actually, this presentation is in 3 parts, but I'm only going to do 2 shorter parts today. The first part covers what I call the big picture and movement ecology. And then the second part looks at slaughter-free networks, theory of change, and how it serves as a blueprint for our actions, for our activism. The third part covers the building blocks of how slaughter-free network creates campaigns, but we won't be covering that today. It's a bit too much material for this particular kind of session, but before I get into the presentation though, I'd like to start out by telling you a story about a young activist who just got involved with Slaughter-Free Network. And I can't think of a more inspiring story than this one that we've had in a long time. And so Carrie is someone we met recently and started talking to her about an action that we were planning at the hospitality trade show, a big hospitality trade show where one of our targets was going to be speaking. And this target is the CEO of Marriott Hotels, which is the largest hotel chain in the world. And also he's on the board of McDonald's Corporation. So he's a big power player in not just the food industry, but also the hospitality industry. And Carrie and I spent a lot of time talking about our campaign. She asked a lot of great questions, wanted to understand where we were, the fact that we had tried to reach out to this Capuano through emails and phone calls and multiple ways, sending him reports, having our supporters contact him, getting hundreds of calls and emails into his office, talking to some of his other staff. We gave her the context for where we were, and we said, we're ready to escalate. We're ready to escalate because there's no way we're going to be able to reach him without a face-to-face. The key for me is we have to get in front of our targets. We have to look them in the eye, and whatever your style of communication is fine, but we have to have that dialogue. And we have to have that situation where the target cannot just so easily dismiss us, because they can dismiss emails and phone calls for days, right? But when you're in front of them, they have to listen to you. And this man was on stage. So in any case, Carrie and I talked about all the fears and the doubts that you have when you're first going to, we're asking her to speak out in front of a large audience of industry professionals and bigwigs to one of the most powerful people in our food industry, one of the most visible spokespeople on stage. And it's quite intimidating. There's lots of anxiety and fear that goes into doing this, even if you've done it several times. But in her case, it was the first time. So we had a lot of discussion about this. And the interesting thing I found about Carrie was that she was very determined and very convinced that this was the right thing for her to do. And she was going to prepare herself. She was going to, we role played, we played out different scenarios about how things could go, because there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of wild cards when you do a speak out, when you do a confrontation like this in a public place. You don't know if you're going to get in. You don't know a lot of things, right? But you prepare, so that you have all these different scenarios played out in your mind. So anyway, the morning of the event comes to be, and Carrie and I are texting with Leah, who's our coordinator, lead coordinator on the campaign. And so she's waiting outside of the ballroom at the hotel where the event is taking place. And she's really starting to get nervous, and she's really starting to feel like maybe she can't do this, right? And there's security everywhere. Okay, so she's starting to think, I don't even think I'm going to get in, right? So, well, the next thing we heard was that it was done. And she said, let me get in my car and I'll call you and tell you what happened. So Carrie was able to deliver the message in a wonderful way, very professional, passionate way to our target, Anthony Capuano, the CEO of Marriott Hotels, for those who may have not heard that. And what I love about this story is the fact that it's a story about someone overcoming their fears, facing their fears, and then overcoming them. And it's also a story about how we can challenge ourselves, because we're always saying, no, we can't do this. No, we can't do that. No, we're not capable of that. But in this case, Carrie was able to kind of expand on what she thought she could do and bring herself to a new height. And it was really successful. One of the key comments, I think, from Anthony Capuano during this event was he said, you're doing a huge disservice to this conference. And we know what he meant by that. He meant that this is what people are going to remember when they think about this conference. They're going to say, oh yeah, that's the conference where Anthony Capuano, the CEO of Marriott Hotels, was challenged by a woman in the audience and asked to actually stop ignoring the abusive conditions of his chicken supplier, Mary's Chicken, which is a humane hoax. And she got that message delivered to him, and he knew that people would only remember that. That would be the incident. So it was for us a big success. And we're so proud of her, and I think she's really proud of herself and feels greatly empowered by it. So I know that's kind of a long story, but I tell you that because that captures the essence of what we do. It's very important for us to get in front of the power holders, of our food system, because not many of us are doing it. And if we're going to change the food system, these people need to be held accountable. So I'm just going to switch here to the next slide. This part of the presentation is about looking at the big picture, which I think is super important, because when we look at the big picture and all the different parts of our movement, we start kind of getting a better understanding of, you know, what we need to do and where's our strength and weaknesses. We can start seeing things a little bit more clearly. And then we start to see patterns for success as well, and failure too, because failure is not a shameful thing. It's a learning experience. When we fail, we learn some of the most valuable things there is to learn, I believe. And so I think we need this big picture perspective, and we need to give it more time and thought, and just get away from our everyday campaigns and the work that we're doing so hard. We're working so hard every day. But my suggestion is just let's take some time tonight to look at the big picture and see the whole. That's what movement ecology is about. So here's a couple things that I've learned about movement ecology and how other movements look at it. There's always a strong grassroots base of support with successful movements, and the grassroots isn't tethered by connections or influences or special interests. So grassroots movement is freer to express itself and to think out of the box. Our movement is peculiar and stands in quite a bit of contrast, because as I see it, we're mostly a professional advocacy movement. In other words, we teach people the skills of lobbying, law, subject matter experts, doctors, veterinarians, and we value this highly in our culture. So professionalism and professional skills is what our movement is mostly focused on, and yet very little focus on grassroots movement building. I'd also like to talk about the role of the radical flank and the moment of the whirlwind, which is really what this presentation is about. It's where is the turning point in the animal freedom movement? Well, there's, whether we realize it or not, there's been a moment of the whirlwind in the racial justice and anti-violence movement, and the emergence of Black Lives Matter, which we'll get into in a moment. But just to give you a sense of how undervalued the grassroots is, only 3% of donor dollars goes to grassroots organizations. The rest of it goes to professional organizations. And this is from a study called Dollars in Dissent, a study of where dollars go in the human rights world, as well as other social welfare organizations. And so I'd like to look at, this is a big picture look at the 8 stages of a social movement, which I really like. Activist Bill Moyers developed this 8 stages of a social movement back in the 1970s. And he was an anti-war and civil rights activist and theorist. I mean, we could do a whole presentation on his work or just this 8 stages. That's how much he's contributed, I think, to understanding of social movements. But for the sake of this presentation, let's just look at a few important takeaways from this model, which, by the way, became part of a book that he wrote called Doing Democracy, if you're interested in diving deeper into his work. So the first takeaway is the general trend in phases 1 through 6 is about growing public support. Stage 4 is a moment of the whirlwind, which galvanizes public support. And so, for example, the George Floyd incident and the other related police brutality incidents, those were moments of the whirlwind for the racial justice movement. So that moment of the whirlwind is stage 4. But that's followed by a crash, a kind of crash in stage 5. And that's when a lot of people leave a movement because they think they failed. They think that support has waned and there's a lot of people defect. But then movements recover in stage 6, he says. And then stage 7 is when we achieve a major victory, like when the Supreme Court decided that gay marriage was the law of the land. Stage 7 is when we really need lobbyists and lawyers and attorneys and legislators and politicians to work their magic, codifying into law and legislation the changes that now has majority support. And then he says stage 8 is ensuring that the victory doesn't get undone by staying vigilant and making sure that we're actively making sure that sticks. Because we've seen things get undone, haven't we? Like Roe versus Wade, for example. So where are we then in the AR, animal rights vegan movement? And I would put ourselves at a stage 2 or 3. You might see things differently, but I don't think we've had that moment of the whirlwind. I think we're still in that phase of the conditions are ripening, and I think the public senses that perhaps something is brewing, but we haven't had a moment of the whirlwind. So, would like to talk about the radical flank. Also kind of put that word into context, because a lot of times, a lot of people think of the word radical as being stigmatized and having many negative connotations, suggestive of violent acts or thuggery or whatever. But the reality is that the radical flank is often associated with the grassroots side of the movement because they feel freer to express themselves than professional organizations that are tethered by special interests and donors that demand them to do things in a certain way. Radicals generally have a bad name, but it's important to remember that people that we revere now, like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., were also considered radicals and very unliked in many parts of their movement. The studies and real world experience actually show that that perhaps we should be thanking the radical flank. This particular study shows that the radical flank increases support for the moderate factions by making the moderate position look more palatable in the eyes of the public. But it wouldn't look more palatable unless the public was aware that there were more radical positions on the issue, like complete animal freedom or animal liberation. If they weren't aware of that, then welfare reforms would probably look extreme instead. Instead, because of the radical flank, the public generally sees favorably animal welfare reforms. So that's an example there. Now, for those of you, I don't know how far we're going to get into this. These tables, these two tables I created is an attempt to kind of assign traits, personality traits, to the moderate flank versus the radical flank. And it's not a, binary thing at all. It's a spectrum between some people are right in the middle. Some people are way off to the moderate side. Other people are way off to the radical side. These tables were my attempt to kind of attribute personality traits to these two important sides of any movement. And I don't think we're going to have time to get into all this, but I'm happy to share these slides with you. There's two. This table is in two parts actually. But generally speaking, the moderate flank is I feel is about 90% of our movement. It's the large animal organizations and their majority of supporters. It's pro-reform, believes that working on reforms is more reasonable or likely to happen in the short term. They're willing to work with existing leadership. They're more accepting or resigned of the system's flaws. They know the food industry is corrupt, for example, but they're willing to work with it. They employ lobbying, legal, and legislative strategies to effect reforms. They try to get public support through diplomacy. They have a more transactional worldview that favors more modest reforms in the short term.
Hey, Robert.
Big picture.
Robert, I think we're still seeing the same slide from before. We haven't seen it change. We don't see your tables, your wonderful tables.
I am so sorry. Do you know how much time I spent on these tables?
Yeah, that's why we don't want to miss them. That would be a shame. Okay, now we see the movement ecology.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, sorry about that. Spent a lot of time on these. Another important factor is that the moderate flank stresses facts, figures, rational arguments, the Enlightenment worldview. And then the radical flank is different because they're more focused on the bigger picture. They're pro-transformation rather than pro-reform. They want to work on the outside of the system to disrupt business as usual because they feel that it's simply too corrupt to work with and to have any meaningful reform. They believe a new leadership is essential to change. Current leadership is too corrupt, as I said. They use grassroots, bottom up and confrontational strategies to target power holders. They win public support through what Chenoweth, social scientist Erica Chenoweth would call constructive conflict. We'll talk about that later. And then they have this kind of Overton window worldview. In other words, activists move public acceptance in the direction that, even though it seems crazy today to think about animal liberation or freedom, it's important to have that message out there because society doesn't move in the direction we want it to until we ask for what we want now and anticipating that the change will happen in the future. Another interesting thing about the radical flank that you'll hear from someone like Roger Hallam, who was one of the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion. He likes to talk about this a lot. He calls it the professionalization of the public space, which means that it's a stance that appeals to like the rational side of our brain. But Roger Hallam will tell us that appeals to emotions and symbolism, powerful stories of emotion, of emotional weight and symbolic value reach a much broader audience and have a bigger impact. So that's the big picture part of this. Michelle, how much time do you think we have left?
You can keep going if you like. We have
Yeah.
plenty of time. We have plenty of time we'll still have plenty of time for questions, even if you go up until 8 o'clock.
Okay.
It's up to you. Are
All
you
right.
on
Yeah.
another slide now?
Yeah. I'm kind of like, I've got about 10 or 15 minutes left.
Okay.
Okay. Again, 2 charts here. I'm happy to share these slides with anybody who wants them. So part 2 is theory of change. Can you see that slides, SFN theory of change?
Yes.
Which stands for slaughter-free network, for those who didn't maybe recognize that. So, okay, so theory of change, it sounds very theoretical. It doesn't sound like something that is going to help us, really, right? But I can't tell you how important it is. It's also really part of looking at the big picture here. And what is theory of change? It's a set of beliefs that creates the blueprint for our actions, for our activities. And it answers the question, why do we do what we do? Everybody has a theory of change, whether they recognize it or not, because all actions are, when it comes to activism, are derivative. They originate in certain beliefs and ideas that we have about what's going to be successful or powerful or impactful. So in Chicago, we're going to do a series of workshops where we're going to ask everyday people and activists to define what their theory of change is and present it to a group, so we can all understand better how people view what works and what doesn't, and why they do what they do. We need to understand the driving principles behind our actions and those of our fellow activists to really become a more solidified movement. A lot of social change theorists and leading organizers always think about power and how we understand power as one of the most fundamental things. And so that's what I'm doing here to reflect that. Understanding power is something we almost never hear about in our own movement, right? In fact, it's kind of stigmatized. People aren't really even comfortable with the word, right? Like it suggests like abuse of power or violence or, but actually understanding power is absolutely essential to an effective campaign. So this pyramid shows a popular myth that politicians and lobbyists and lawyers, they make changes from the top. And that the power lies, at the top. But the reality is that power lies in the people, in the grassroots. From the grassroots perspective, it's all about leveraging the power of the people. And the grassroots side will say, we gave this power up to these people, and now they're abusing their power. And that abuse of power is only possible when people have relinquished their own power and consented to be governed and are obedient to those power holders. And just as people give up their power, they can also reclaim it. And this explains why speaking truth to power is so important, and it's the mantra of this vision of power. And so how does this fit with the animal rights or animal freedom movement? Well, look at who's in power of our food system and how powerful the meat, dairy, and egg industries are. And you'll begin to see the kind of people that we need to be targeting if we want to challenge the existing power structure, which is what social movements do. They have to do it. It's the essential work of all social movements. I love a quote by an activist, Backbone Bill. He's a guy who led an incredibly successful campaign against a pebble mine in the Puget Sound region that was going to introduce all this arsenic into the waterways. But anyway, he came in and with a direct action type of campaign, really escalated things. After 10 years of no results, the campaign had no results for 10 years. He came in and really stepped things up, and he was able to get the state to buy the land away from the pebble mine. But anyway, he's famous for a quote that says, 4 words: movements lead, politicians follow. Movements lead, politicians follow. Those 4 words debunk this pyramid myth of power. It says that movements create the power, and politicians basically do what is demanded of them, essentially. So with Slaughter-Free Network, we have 4 pillars of our position on with regard to the food system. The first point is that our food system is broken and can't be fixed. It must be dismantled. It must be rebuilt with new leadership that reflects our values and our need for, whoops, I think I didn't go to the right slide. I'm sorry. There we go. Sorry about that. And so new leadership that reflects our values and our need for human, non-human, and environmental justice. The second point is that the current power holders of our food system have been corrupted by special interests from animal agriculture beyond reform. It's kind of like the rotten apple scenario. There's no good part of the apple left. The concentration of power in the food industry is so great, it couldn't get much worse, really. The third point is that the current power holders benefit from things staying the same. They don't want to see things change, and they won't allow it, because that would mean conceding, that would mean losing their power. So we say that this compels us to act for new leadership, new values, and we must challenge their power through our campaigns. And the fourth and last point is, of course, everyone knows this, but you can't state it enough. We face an unprecedented climate and ecological crisis, an animal extinction and biodiversity crisis that demands bold transformative change strategies and actions that accelerate public support, not incrementally grow it, because we don't have the luxury of time. And I want to talk just briefly here about some of the people that have influenced us and this theory of change that Slaughter-Free Network is embracing at the moment. We've learned a lot from some key figures in social movement
Robert,
theory.
are you on another slide?
Yes. Yes, there it is. Thank you. So we're going to talk a little bit about Erica Chenoweth and the work she's done in her book, seminal book, Why Civil Resistance Works. We're going to talk about Richard Ryder, Martin Luther King Jr. is a huge influence for us, Cesar Chavez, and Black Lives Matter. The incredible thing about Black Lives Matter is that post George Floyd, they were able to achieve a 63% approval, public approval rating from 33%, according to an ABC News Washington Post poll after the George Floyd incident and all of the momentum that they created after that incident. So that was a moment of the whirlwind. That's the kind of moment we're looking for. Erica Chenoweth has, a lot to her work, so this isn't going to do any justice to it. But she's a political and social scientist who conducted an analysis of social movements, which is kind of unprecedented in how comprehensive it was. She looked at all movements in the last 100 years to the present, and in her ongoing research, she's found these common patterns to successful movements. And there's 4 traits that she talks about. The first is numbers, having 3% or close to it, 3% of the population actively contributing in some way to the movement. The second thing is innovation. Repetition without results is a dead end. We must continually reinvent ourselves in order to capture the media and public's attention. Innovation. The third thing is discipline. And by discipline, she means primarily narrative discipline, and in our communications about our campaign, about our messaging. And our ability to overcome objections is a huge thing for her in terms of success versus failure. The fourth thing is defections. When we start seeing people from the other side defect, we know we're onto something. So, in other words, if we find when we can get powerful people that have huge followings, celebrities or political figures or intellectuals, whoever they are, that have a large following, when they start defecting and say, boy, now I really understand the animal freedom movement and support it, those kind of things really help things along.
Robert, are you on another slide?
Yes, this was the slide. Why do I keep doing this? Sorry. This is the Erica Chenoweth slide that I just went through. Apologies. So numbers, innovations, defections, discipline. 4 traits of a successful grassroots movement. Richard Ryder is another great inspiration, I think, for our theory of change. He's the philosopher who coined this term speciesism in the 1970s. But he's also been pretty active in campaigning. And about 10 years ago, he gave a presentation at the Animals and Society conference in the UK. And at one point, he said something that really resonated with me, which is the golden rule is to contact the people with the real power. Sounds pretty straightforward, but we're not doing it. We really aren't doing enough of this. We're talking more to consumers because we think it's a consumer movement, and we're not really appreciating the fact that it's a move that the food system is largely controlled by these very powerful industry elites. Okay. There we go. Just a couple more slides to wrap up here. So in her book, Raw Deal, a new book called Raw Deal, reporter Chloe Sorvino, who writes for Forbes and many other public news outlets, she's been reporting on the corrupt practices of top meat industry executives for many years. And in this book, Raw Deal, she interviews Errol Schweitzer, who's the former vice president of grocery for Whole Foods Market. And he told her in this interview, quote, "The concept of voting with your dollars is a false messiah. The grocery industry manufactures the demand for the products it wants to sell, that it sells. Retailers manufacture demand, they advertise." It's interesting that this mirrors what Ryder says about the absolute necessity of reaching the power holders of our food system, right? I think it's hard for us, it's hard for me to grasp the immense power of just a handful of decision makers who control our food system. The concentration of power and the devastating impact that power has on animals and the planet, it's really hard to fathom. And yet we've done little to nothing to challenge it, but to hold these people accountable. This is why I've decided to focus my activism on targeting these power holders, since they are calling the shots. They're manufacturing demand for products, regardless of, they're creating demand. They're deciding what's going to be heavily marketed, promoted, and invested in, and what products will not be. In this light, focusing all of our energies on end users and on consumers who have little or no power over what is available to them on the store shelf and at what price is not the strategy for me to the kind of change in our food system that we see. What keeps me up at night is whether our movement will ever get to the core of the problem, which is animal agriculture, before it's too late. Will we get there before we're extinct, or will we get there when we're too far on the path of extinction to have the impact we want? Are we content to just chip away at the foundation or at the edges rather than striking at the core? If we follow other movements, we would be striking at the big polluters or the big fossil fuel producers or the big banks or big pharma. All of the other major movements are doing just that. So why aren't we going after the bigwigs in the food industry? That's a big question I have that I haven't been able to figure out yet. I'm not saying that no groups are doing it, because obviously some are, but not necessarily in a grassroots way. They're doing it in the reform way, the Mercy for Animals way, the Humane League way, where we're asking for 2 inches more of cage space or whatever the demand is, which is not enough to prevent our extinction and the planet's extinction. So I'm going to wrap up with I just want to say a word about conflict, because there's a taboo in our culture, in our Western Europe, a dominant European-based culture, that conflict is terrible, bad, to be avoided at all costs. And we should only unify, we should only show solidarity, which we need. Eventually we need solidarity, but constructive conflict, remember that's a term that Erica Chenoweth I pointed to earlier. Constructive conflict is used by activists strategically for the following reasons: to get attention and discussion or dialogue going on an issue. Number 2, to put pressure on powerful targets to get them to realize we mean business. And third, it's the first phase in any resolution or negotiation that's needed to achieve our demand. So if we want a company to go plant-based, or if we want them to cut ties with an abusive supplier, it's often the moral crisis, the conflict that we create is the way we get attention on the issue. And it's the first phase to then getting at the negotiation table, which is ultimately where we want to be. We want to be taken seriously. We want to be part of the decision-making process for these huge decisions these people are making behind closed doors without our input at all. All right, so just wrapping up here with this theory of change, and you might be asking, well, I have pointed to how this translates, but I'm just going to wrap up with things that I think could be useful in pursuing this theory of change. I think we have a critical need to build a missing grassroots base of support. We have a ton of professional advocacy organizations and skills, but we don't have much of a grassroots base. It's very weak. It needs to be much stronger to compete with other social movements that have succeeded and have gotten results. We need a better balance between radical and moderate forces, and a better understanding that both are necessary, and that certain roles are more important than others. So the radical side, the grassroots side, is needed to get things going and to move things along the public support path. And then the moderate side is needed to, like I said earlier, when we were looking at Bill Moyer's 8 stages, the moderate side is needed to legislate and codify into law the changes that there is now public support for. I'd say we need to do a lot more with pressure campaigns that target the power holders in our food system, and doing it in a public forum like Carrie did at the hospitality trade show in front of big industry elites and people that that really have a lot of influence. And then broadcasting that on social media and other media forums so that we can get that conversation out there as much as possible. The other thing, a couple other things are that we need to be focusing on how we can get to a 3% public support or participation level. I don't know how we're going to get there, but we need to do a lot more collaborative efforts and with other movements and other groups, even perhaps those that aren't yet vegan. Veganism can't be a prerequisite to enter our movement. We need to allow people in so that they can learn about the cause and why that veganism makes sense. But we should let them in even if they're not yet, I think, and because we need the 3%. And so another important thing is cultivating innovation and creativity in our campaigns. Using emotional, moral appeals, symbolic appeals, rather than facts and figures that most people don't really care about. And not repeating the same thing over and over again, but really thinking how we can reinvent ourselves. And then finally, it's very useful to identify the weak links in the food system, because these are opportunities to disrupt business as usual. With power holders, there are two ways to get to them, I think. There's through their reputation or through their capital, or both. If we threaten their reputation by exposing them for bad behavior, for supporting animal abusive companies, or damaging the planet somehow, or wildlife, then we threaten their reputation and they're more likely to come to the negotiation table and meet our demands. And if we threaten just business as usual, and which means we threaten capital and profit in legal ways, hopefully, that don't end us up in jail for years, then we also get their attention because they realize that we can impact their capital, their profit. So I'll wrap it up for now. There's more to this presentation. Like I said, there's a section 3, which is how we build campaigns, but this is the starting point. And thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Wow, I thought that was really fantastic, Robert. You got a lot of people really thinking, and I'm sure we have questions now. So we are opening it up to questions in the chat, or you can hit the hand raise icon. And Robert, make sure before we leave, you talk about Slaughter Free Network a little bit more and how people can support you and get involved.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not sure the questions started, but Tenebrae asks, how can we give non-human animals legal standing for the purpose of eliminating ag-gag laws and restoring First Amendment rights of information?
That's a question for an attorney, I think. That I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that, but I think we have a lot of work to do in the grassroots space before we can expect laws, really meaningful laws, to really stick in that arena, in that area. I think it's amazing that we've already seen ag-gag fail in many states, even though it's legal, the courts ruled that it couldn't stand based on constitutional grounds. That's amazing considering how small our movement is. But with the ag-gag, I think that crossed over into other movements, and that's why there was more support for it, because people saw it as a constitutional rights issue rather than just an active, an animal issue. So perhaps that's why it's kind of failed in many states.
All right, feel free to post more questions in the chat. If I missed your question, please repost it. Try to stay on the topic if you all wouldn't mind, so we stay on track. But Rodney's asking, what's your view on lab-grown meat? It's a hot question these days. I feel it would be a game changer and will eventually end the slaughter industry, or at least put a major dent in it.
Yeah, so while the cultivated meat industry and investment is growing, so is the meat industry, the traditional livestock industry, by leaps and bounds. And many leading spokespeople for the meat industry say that they see cultivated meat as part of their portfolio of alternatives, but they don't see it as a major, sector, at least now. One of the big concerns I have over any new technology is who's going to own the intellectual property rights for this. If it's owned by the same corporations that run the current food system, we're screwed. It falls into those hands, which it looks like it could, and there's not a grassroots movement demanding that it goes into a different direction. It doesn't matter how great cultivated meat takes, it doesn't matter, it won't take over without people demanding it. So I think it could be promising, but I'm skeptical because look at other technologies that have made huge promises to change society. And I'm sorry, but the market and technology does not correct social problems. It is a reaction. It is the market's, the private sector's response to the shift in society's values. And that's the work that activists do. We shift society's values so that the market then corrects itself and creates a cultivated meat market, you see?
Yes, so Tenebrae asks, how do we get lots of people to bear witness? And I'll add to that, to watch the footage so that their eyes will see and that they may feel compassion. And is that important?
I think that it's important that people see the truth, and the model, the theory of change I'm talking about today is about targeting power holders. So the people that we really want to see the truth and bear witness are the CEOs of Marriott and Cargill, and the people that we think don't care, right? And are sociopaths. But actually, like, they do care about their reputations and they care about their bottom line. So we can dramatically shift things if we focus on the right people running the food system, rather than just say, we're going to look, we're going to talk to random people and have them bear witness. The people that have little or no power over the food system. If we really want to see these significant changes, that's kind of my message today, is our focus is on consumers when it really should be more on power holders, because those are the people that can really accelerate the change we want.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Definitely we're discussing consumerism, which it tends to be, right? It tends to be where we focus. And so this is turning things on its head. But Ahimsa is asking, do you find intersectionality to be a barrier to the vegan movement? I found that as soon as human rights issues are brought up, the plight of non-human animals take a back seat.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that to a lot of people that I have conversations with, I think they very much see the interconnecting oppressions. I think if we judge what we see online versus what kind of conversations we have in person or face to face, it's very different. Online conversations tend to be more toxic, more divisive, vitriolic, because that's the nature of social media. So I hope we don't rely on those platforms to have these conversations, because they're way too important. I mean, we should have some conversation, but in the end, it's really about getting in front of people, I think, to have the impact we need. So I think there's a sense that humans feel that they're, humans feel that they're competing with other animals, and we've been conditioned to believe that the interests of other animals or non-human animals are in competition with human interests. That's something we've been conditioned to believe for thousands of years. And yeah, we have to work at showing that the sources of oppression are essentially the same corporations, the same government officials that think that the world is their oyster. They can exploit the earth, they can destroy nature, they can destroy the lives of animals and vulnerable human populations. They're all kind of the same, the same paradigm.
Jackie is asking, how can we use the courts against the power players?
We're not ready for that.
I just don't think phase two. Phase two.
Yeah.
That's phase
No,
five.
that's not thing to say, because I know there's great groups doing great legal work. Don't get me wrong. We work with attorneys too on different legal strategies that we're trying to work out. I fully respect lobbyists and attorneys, what they're doing, but there has to be enough public support to more easily pass meaningful laws that will stick. In other words, that will not get reversed. And we don't have the public support we need yet. We have a lot of work to do to build public support so that those laws can then, we can get those attorneys and lobbyists to work their magic and get them codified into law. And the way do we build public support, in my opinion, is through grassroots movement building. That's what I've learned. And we don't have a grassroots base. It's not big enough. It's not strong enough. It's not out there winning public support over. So we need to get to that 3% at least to see probably a turning point.
That's what we're talking about. Lisa asks, are you aware of any countries, other countries that have successful vegan animal rights groups with political representation at big decision-making tables? Is there any country ahead of us with that? Maybe Israel, maybe England? No, I'm guessing.
It's not a country as it is a group or a movement, so for example, Animal Rising in England, in UK, is doing what we're talking about, where they're really targeting powerful people and seeking change that way. And I would say I don't know too much about the Israeli movement. I'm sure there's that element there. There is in the US too. We're trying to fill that gap or help fill that void in our grassroots movement. But yeah, there needs to be more. I don't think I can think of a handful off the top of my head.
Trey is saying animal ag is so big. I know you did another workshop on that. Too big to fail, not too big to fall. How do we choose a target, and how do we get everyone on the same page until we win?
Right. That's the thing that keeps me up at night. Remember, Trey? That's what I said keeps me up at night, because other movements have figured out how to target the biggest banks, the biggest fossil fuel producers, the biggest polluters, the biggest pharma players that are supporting animal ag. These other movements have figured out how to collectively target those big players and zoom in on them. And I think we can do the same, but I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, because I'd have to listen to a lot of people like Trey and we'd have to figure it out how we're going to do it.
So maybe do you want to mention any of the successes that you've had with Slaughter Free Network? It's making me remember when AAM was in Chicago and I did my first ever, and maybe for many people, like home disruption. Maybe you could talk about what that is, whether that's effective, and what's the best way, to do that. I know we were targeting Coke Foods. And I thought it was just so strategic and well thought out, your entire approach. So maybe you could talk about that.
Well, thank you, Michelle. Actually, we often look at tactics in isolation rather than looking at them in the context of what action is needed at that point in the campaign. A campaign that uses an escalation strategy. In other words, starts out with diplomacy and uses the carrot and stick approach, so to speak. Starts out kind of soft, but then builds over time, builds pressure, builds energy, builds momentum, builds media coverage. And so at a point with Cook Foods, we were trying to build that with that action and the home demo. Some home demos have actually caused major investors in the meat industry to divest. We had a really shocking situation where a huge slaughterhouse, calf and cow, dairy cow slaughterhouse was going to be built in outside of Milwaukee. And the company that owned the slaughterhouse company was an investment firm that cares nothing about Milwaukee or anything like that. They don't even care about animals, or they just have a lot of money and they're trying to figure out where to put their money, invest their money. So we tried to get their attention and it didn't work for a year. And then we did a home demo and a protest, and that got a lot of attention. Unfortunately, the police were really terrible to a couple activists there. But anyway, nobody got hurt. But that led to a conversation with that financier that I had for like 45 minutes. And I think we made a lot of headway during that call. And what I realized about him, which is typical of almost all powerful people, is that they want to be seen as good people. They want to have a reputation and maintain the public's trust. So if you threaten that with a campaign that threatens to expose them for some bad behavior, they're more likely to come to the negotiation table. And that's exactly what happened in this case. He came and talked to us about this. And then he announced 5 days later that he was going to completely divest from not just that slaughterhouse, but from any slaughterhouse project around the country that they had going. So I don't know whether that happened or not, but the slaughterhouses didn't get built. So that's a good thing. But yeah, there's an example.
Great example. Any other questions? Folks, any other questions or comments or experiences with what Robert is talking about, or something you found effective, or something you just need a little advice or guidance from Robert in terms of campaigns that you're currently running? And then also, Robert, I wanted to ask you off the cuff if you have any books to recommend that speak to this topic of other movements and strategies.
I do. I also have a playlist, a YouTube playlist that I have been compiling for over a year now of videos and presentations and panel discussions and things of that nature that I feel have been very inspiring and insightful for me. And I'm happy to share that playlist with people that want to dig deeper into this, because I keep adding to it as I find new things.
Wonderful. And so people can find that, you mean, on your YouTube channel? Or
I'm happy to post a link in the chat, but then it goes away after the call. So
well, you don't have to worry about that now. We'll find it. We'll put it up. We could put it on our YouTube channel with this video.
Yeah, I'm happy to post that link.
Okay, if you have it handy. And also, if anybody knows the names of Robert's books, I mean, I have them, I'll post them. the two books that you have participated in. And there was a question here also. Strategy question. Wait, was there another one too? Okay. Is it better to show these horrible slaughterhouse and factory farming pictures, or rather nice, very, very nice photos of individual animals? Claudine is asking.
Well, when you're trying to get the attention of power holders, I'd say you want to show them what's really happening. I really think that they need to know what they're supporting. When it comes to the general public audience, what we have found on social media, I think that's where the question is coming, like, with Free From Harm, which started in 2009, it's mainly an online presence. We have found that graphic content performs better engagement, more people responding to it, more people viewing it. It sounds kind of counterintuitive because a lot of people think that people don't want to see that, but I think our stats show otherwise, at least in our case.
So Andres is asking how to organize a home demo, from finding the CEO or target and their address, and how to make sure we're not crossing the law by protesting on public property in front of that home. Yeah, how to not get arrested while demoing in front of someone's residence is a good question.
Great set of questions. So we have to do a lot of detective work to track these powerful people. We spend a lot of time doing detective work and looking where they're public speaking, where there's events happening, and going to the headquarters and scoping out sites. You have to spend a lot of time getting to know your target and what they do. Maybe they're part of a nonprofit, or they're a major donor to, we found that one target of ours is a big philanthropist and gives a lot to the ballet, the DC ballet. So we thought, oh, he's probably going to show up at certain key events. Those are good opportunities to maybe have face-to-face. So it really requires getting to know your target really well and digging around online and, as much as possible. As far as the legality of home demos, generally speaking, if you're on a public way, like a sidewalk or an alley or a street, I wouldn't recommend you be on a busy street, but let's just say you're on a public sidewalk, you generally have the most protection of your constitutional rights. I'm not an attorney. I don't, claim to be at all. And every situation should be evaluated for where it is, and whatever special laws could come into play. There are several states and cities that have laws restricting amplified sound that have to be looked at if you're going to use amplified sound, but you can almost always use your own voice. So we evaluate those home demo situations or whatever the action is based on a lot of different, specifics to that location and that person. I'm happy to help plan something like that if somebody is interested in my help.
You would be the go-to guy on that. Are there any more questions? Did I miss any questions? If so, please let me know. Please repost them. Are there any other questions? People are talking a little bit about shaming people in the chat. What do you think about using shame strategically, Robert?
Look, I don't call it shame. I call it holding powerful people accountable. Every other movement does it unapologetically. We should not hold back from holding powerful people accountable. That's what this is about. It's not about shaming them. It's about using our voice because they're making decisions that affect all of us and the planet and animals without our input and behind closed doors, which is unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. And so it's not about shaming them. It's about waking them up and making them realize that we're not going to let them get away with doing this business as usual. It just can't work.
Bravo. Any other questions? We'll see if there's any other questions coming in, but I guess, Robert, you could talk, anything else you want to say about Slaughter Free Network, how people can find you and support you, and what's next for you?
The easy way is just to go to slaughterfreenetwork.org /sign up and check if you're interested in volunteering or having a conversation with me or learning more about our campaigns and you want to get involved in some way, just check the box that says you want to volunteer. And that'll trigger a follow-up from us to get a conversation going with you. We look at each person, we look at each new person and try to evaluate what their skills and talents are and how they can fit into a role that's needed in our network.
Nice. Okay, any other questions? Maybe a final question, otherwise we are gonna, we'll wrap up in a bit here. I don't know if Carrie, you mentioned her, who was the brave soul who spoke at the hospitality gathering, and I forget the person's name. I don't know if she's here, but I would love to hear a little bit how that actually felt for her, but I'm not sure if she's here. It makes me nervous just thinking about it, like my stomach. I would try to do it anyway. We have to be bold. That's what this is. It helps us become bolder and stronger. And it I think we grow, and I don't know if she wants to talk about that or if she's here, but have you found that for yourself, Robert? Like, forget about if you're a meek person. This is for the animals. You sort of put that aside. That's how I have just, the cause is greater than my fears. So, but
Yeah.
did you grow in that? Have you seen yourself growing in that way, becoming bolder? Obviously you are.
I think so, and I feel like it's, activism is a sacrifice. We have to sacrifice certain things, comforts in our life sometimes, and to take ourselves out of our comfort zone. And it's not just for the activism and for the cause, but it's also for personal growth. It just makes us stronger people. We tend to want, humans seem by nature to want to just take the path of least resistance. And I understand that, but here we have a cause that can really invigorate us and challenge us. And to have the privilege of being able to do the work that I do, and the rest of you do, is quite a thing to, revel in. So yeah, I think we need to kind of take chances, risks, sacrifices that are sensible, but also expand our work, I guess.
Yeah. 100%, very inspirational. So
I'm here. I can speak about it a little bit. Can you hear me?
Yeah, is that Carrie?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Let me see if I can find my screen. Sorry, I'm not like super familiar with Zoom, but hi everybody. I'm Carrie. I've been vegan like 8 years, and I've been doing a lot of online activism. But a couple months ago, I got more involved in person, and I started doing like voiceless or anonymous for the voiceless cubes and that type of thing. And I can't remember who it was who kind of introduced me to Robert, but I'm so thankful that they did, because I feel like Robert and I are like so similar in our thinking, because for a long time I felt like we need to go above and beyond what we're doing. So talking to him privately and Leah has just been so refreshing, because they've just reminded me that my thinking was on the right track. We have to start targeting more powerful people, and it was very nerve-wracking, but at the end of the day, it is for the animals. And it just really upsets me that these people are able to get away with the things that they're doing without being held accountable. So, I was happy to do it. Like, there were some factors when it came to the security and some stuff like that with getting in. But I'm a spiritual person, and I just kept saying, if I'm supposed to do this, make a way for me to get in there. And right then a security guard turned and started talking to two people, and I just walked straight through. So I think it was meant to be. So happy that it was able to happen. And I honestly think that I feel like we're still getting results from it, because we got the direct number of someone who works for Marriott, and he hasn't returned our calls yet, but he knows that we exist. He knows that we exist, and it put, our message on the map in a more public, powerful way. And I know that there's going to be more in the future, and I'm hoping that we can get other people who will just step up and, we just have to do it. We just have to do it. It's, we'll live. We'll live. I mean, it was a very hard day. My nerves were shot. Took a while to calm down, but we can do this, especially when we have support. And the thing is, like with Robert, he organized it so well. He researched it so well that I could channel all of my energy into just dressing the part, because it was a very corporate environment. I had to focus on fitting in, being under the radar, what I was going to say. Robert rehearsed it with me. And if there's anybody else that finds they may be able to help with some of this, you have the support. Like, having Leah and Robert on the phone with me that day was everything, because I almost passed out at one time, and I told them that I was feeling very faint. But they were right there. They were like, we're cheering you on. And if we have a community and we do our due diligence, we do our research, we prepare ourselves, we know the venue, we know the specifics. I went down to the Venetian 2 times just to research the area. And, we're smart enough to do this. And they're not banking on people going to this extent. But I think that's exactly what we need to do now, because we need to escalate this to the next level. That's it.
Thank you, Carrie, so much for sharing your experience, and this movement definitely appreciates you and needs more activists like you. And we will post the video on our YouTube channel along with this workshop today, and certainly invite people, to share that. And it reminds me of that feeling of adrenaline that maybe others are certainly relating to, that when that adrenaline starts to surge right before it's go time, it's
I will say,
worth it in the end.
and it is very real. It's very real. There's a panicky feeling. I literally thought I might fall on the ground at one point, but what I saw more than anything in that moment was, what could this mean for the animals? Right. And then I just said, okay, you got to take yourself out of it. Just be like, just let the words come out, take yourself out of it, and it'll be over in a few minutes. And then we just celebrated. We were so ecstatic the rest of the day. So
nice.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
I know we're all thinking, if I can do it, you can do it, right?
Absolutely.
None
Let
of
me
us
tell
are
you.
really more, yeah, right?
Yes. Anybody has this power in them, especially because the cause is what will give you the strength. When you think of the animals suffering, and also the fact that they were charging people $40 to $60 for this chicken, that is diseased, suffering, broken limbs, covered in feces, and they are selling it to the public. It's also a very big health concern. And it's also consumer fraud. So it's just everything added up in my mind. And I was like, no, this is just not happening. So yeah. And you guys can like work. I do some hypnosis sessions on myself to just work with confidence. And, I think it's something you got to cultivate too.
Yeah, I was just going to say positive self-talk. Looking in the
Yeah.
mirror, affirmations are so helpful before you do something like that, and connecting with your why you're
Right.
there, who you're there for,
Right.
who we're vegan for, who we're activists for. So thank you, Carrie, very much. Go ahead, Robert.
I just wanted to chime in and thank Kelly for what she did and for speaking tonight. And also just mentioned that she did a wonderful job. She spoke in her own voice, which is what we ask people to do. We don't try to tell them how they need to deliver the message. We do have a specific message to deliver but she used her own voice and her own expression. And there's many different ways to deliver the message. It's not necessarily, it's going to be different for everybody. It can be a very dignified approach. Or it has to be screamed, because it's the only way to get heard is you have to yell it over, a very large space. So it really depends on the circumstances, but there's many voices, there's many ways to execute it. And it's not a negative thing. It's a positive. We should avoid the stereotyping of the yelling activists and the negative stereotype that has, to get past that and to see the power of our voice and the different ways we use it creatively. That's what I think, Carrie did so beautifully.
I agree. So we're gonna wrap up, but Robert, I'll throw it back to you if you have any final words, maybe leaving us on a note of hope. You got nothing?
I'm all talked out. No, I'm kidding.
No, I doubt it. Hang in there,
yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I'm also very open to having side conversations with anyone on the call that would like to do that. I'm happy to continue the conversation because it's a work in progress.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So hold on, folks. Let me just wrap up with a couple of quick announcements before we go tonight. I'd like to announce our next workshop. It's taking place on Wednesday, August 16th. It's Street Epistemology for Animal Rights Outreach. And if you don't know what epistemology is, well, you'll have to come to the workshop to find out. And that's with Pete Ryman, otherwise known as Red Pill Pete on YouTube. And more workshops to be announced. And please check out our previous workshops on our YouTube channel. They're all archived there, and subscribe and share and like and comment. And I want to announce our 2023 live events. The Portland, Oregon Convergence is August 4th coming up through the 12th. And the Ohio Occurrence is September 1st through the 3rd in and around Cincinnati. No experience is required, but registration is required for all of our in-person events. You'll find the information on our Facebook page and on our website, or you can ask any AAM mentor, and we will be planning more live in-person events in 2024. Feel free to drop your Instagram handle in the chat if you'd like to. And also, if you'd like to be on our newsletter list, you can drop your email to me in the chat as well. And please consider becoming a patron by finding AAM on Patreon. Your donations allow AAM to continue to provide free educational resources for activists, which ultimately saves more animals. And that wraps up another AAM workshop. Thank you, Robert, again. Let's see, everybody give him a round of applause over there. Thanks, Trey, for managing the back end. Thank you all for being here and the tireless work you're doing for the animals. It all matters. It all counts. If you're interested in becoming a mentor or mentee or want to get involved, please reach out to us if you'd like to be, oh, I already said that. Until next time, let's see everyone's V. Let's see your V. Peaceful vegan. Stay strong, everyone, and live vegan. Thank you so much.